Hello, Theater 319. I'm here today to talk to you about Oscar Wilde and the importance of being earnest. Now, if you don't remember the importance of being earnest, congratulations on passing Aesthetics 2 because we had to read it for that class. So, Oscar Wilde is credited as one of the greatest writers to ever have lived. And the importance of being earnest is still performed and around today because it is a show that has stood the test of time. This play helped solidify Wilde as one of history's masters of satire, a genre that, we all know that nothing is sacred. Everything gets made fun of in satire. The importance of being earnest criticized Victorian society's focus and standards for marriage by joking at the institution itself. The institution itself, creating characters whose genders would, in reality, portray the opposite of what they would expect, and of what one would expect, and the way in which morality controls people. So, written in 1895, The Importance of Being Earnest centers on Jack Worthing, an English gentleman. Jack has invented a fictitious brother named Ernest, and Jack visits Ernest whenever he wants to get away from the country and everything and go into the city and essentially, maybe party or gamble a little bit. And that's when he visits his friend Algernon. Jack is in love with Algernon's cousin Gwendolen, who reciprocates his love, but they met under the assumption that his name is Ernest. So she thinks that his name really is Ernest, and she's got this idea in her head that she can only marry a man named Ernest. So when Jack asks Lady Bracknell, Gwendolen's mother, for her hand in marriage, he cannot tell her the name of his parents. Turns out he's a foundling who was left in a handbag at Victoria's Station. And Lady Bracknell is displeased with this and says that she will not consent to the marriage until Jack can provide at least one, the name of one parent. So Jack returns home where he lives with his ward Cecily Cardew, and Cecily Cardew is a younger woman that he takes care of. She's supposed to be, I think, about 17 or 18, and her governess, Miss Prism. Jack discovers that Algernon has also arrived at his home, pretending to be Brother Ernest. Algernon falls in love with Cecily, who's been fascinated with the mysterious Ernest for quite some time, having invented a romance between herself and the man she'd never even met. Lady Bracknell and Gwendolen arrive at Jen's home, and chaos and cases of mistaken identity and the truth coming out ensue. It's discovered that Miss Prism was the nurse who misplaced Lady Bracknell's nephew, who is revealed to be Jack, at Victoria's Station. Jack discovers his name actually is Ernest and that he is Algernon's brother, and the play ends with both of the couples in each other's loving embrace. Isn't that nice? Okay, so marriage motivates this play, period. That's the whole point. The whole point of the show is, whether or not marriage is a good thing or a bad thing, or it's about people who want to get married or who don't want to get married. The topic never disappears for very long. There's a brief scene in which two people talk about cake and biscuits, and I think perhaps that's about the only scene in which marriage doesn't, dominate. Marriage doesn't dominate the conversation. Victorian society had very, very strict ideas, as we know, on women. Women had there was this idea about what women should be and how they should not be super promiscuous or flirtatious or anything. And, we kind of think that mainly applies towards single women. Oh, don't flirt with anyone. No, it applied to married women as well, because he writes this line. Algernon says in the first act, when talking about dinner plans, that Lady Bracknell will place me next to Mary Farquhar, who always flirts with her own husband at the dinner table. It's not very pleasant. Indeed, it's not even decent. That sort of thing is enormously on the increase. The amount of women in London who flirt with their own husbands is perfectly scandalous. It looks so bad. It's simply washing one's clean linen in public. Like, Wilde is directly pointing out how ridiculous it is. Even if you are a married woman in the society, you still can't win. And there are other things that he makes fun of too, like Gwendolen, the fact that Gwendolen refuses to marry anyone who isn't named Ernest, and the extensive interview process that Lady Bracknell makes Jack go through before she'll even consider letting him marry her daughter, is a direct comment on the ridiculous, like, marital standards that people had back then. Another marriage ideal that Wilde flips on its head is Jack wanting to marry Gwendolen. It's not the other way around. Women in this time were supposed to be all about their men, like obsessed with what they were doing. They were supposed to be invested in them 100%. That's not Gwendolen. Jack spends all of his time trying to impress Gwendolen. She has a line in the first act as well. Jack agrees with her on something and she says, "Yes, I thought so. In fact, I am never wrong." Women weren't supposed to be opinionated or anything. Actually, there's an article called Victorian Women Expected to be Idle and Innocent, in which Charles Petrie, the author, states that stamp of masculine approval was placed upon an ignorance of the world, lack of opinions, general helplessness and weakness, and, in short, recognition of the female inferiority to the male. Gwendolen is very, very opinionated. She's a modern woman in every sense of the word, like more modern than they would have had in 1895. So Jack's personality is the opposite of men of the era, where, men were thought to be, men had to be large and in charge. And Jack is in charge, he's still he runs his own household and everything, but he's so head over heels in love with Gwendolen, he's willing to do anything for her. He loves her so much, he is willing to rechristen himself so that he can technically really be named Ernest. Marriage and morality go hand in hand a whole lot, and, what this play doesn't really concern itself so much with asking what is moral versus what is immoral, so much as it more laughs at Victorian morality itself. Victorian morality is really black and white. There's no gray area. There was never okay, well, maybe that's okay to do. There's a lot of right and wrong and what people should and should not do. And Oscar Wilde was like, this is ridiculous. The title of the play itself, is, we all know it's a joke. We know it's a play on words. The Importance of Being Earnest, because it's important, for him to be earnest and also to tell the truth. But, that's the point. The plot centers around a man who both is and is not earnest, as well as earnest. Jack and Algernon both create alter egos so that they can go out and do whatever it is they can't do as gentlemen. And with this reasoning, though, Jack is still a hypocrite, because at the beginning of the play, he is still telling Algernon, he says, "Oh, well, perhaps you should stop lying and stop pretending that you have this sick friend," when Jack is almost incapable of not lying. Actually, near the show, he apologizes to Gwendolen because he discovers he's been telling the truth, apparently, his whole life. So, yes. So, Oscar Wilde criticizes society and the expectations that came with it. The Importance of Being Earnest, he's able to flip or, revamp comedy of manners, because it it first appeared in, like, the 1600s, didn't disappear for a little while, but it's like, he revamped it for the modern age in, like, one of the most well-known plays of a comedy of manners. And so he used it to critique the pressures of Victorian society as well as morality. So that's the importance of being earnest, and that's why it's still relevant today, because we still think of it and we still use it as a great example of comedy of manners, and it's been around for in the broad spectrum of history. It really has not been around that long, which is why it's such a modern show with its new ideas and its flipped around characters and its the way the characters behave. And that is why it's still relevant today. Thank you.